Excellent. Okay, so for everybody who's just joined us, this is our session 1 of the free Zoom sessions that I'm offering this year for 2023, just to be able to try and share as much knowledge as possible and give you the opportunity to be able to ask real time and live time any questions that you might actually have. I'm going to ask you to keep your questions, if you don't mind, until the end of the session, just so that we can get through. There is a chat box up in Zoom that you can record your questions if you like. And that way, when we get to the end and we want to open up for questions, we can check out what's going on there. If something happens during the Zoom session at all that I'm unaware of because I'm talking and I'm basically talking to, a monitor, please someone unmute and tell me if there's something going wrong, and I'll certainly see if I can try and fix that. This page is just to give you a little bit of information about myself. Obviously got grey hair, which means I've been doing a lot of things for a long time. Growing garlic for 20 years, did broadacre culinary garlic, 3 hectares at a time, which is about 25 tonne of garlic per year for about 10 years. And for the last 11 years, I've really specialised on seed production, seed growing, pest and disease management very specifically, and breeding new garlics. Those things, including the fact I've been consulting commercially for 10 years to commercial garlic growers, really means that I have a fairly broad knowledge of all of the different garlic groups that grow in all of the different climates, with growing and commercial practices around the world. In fact, not just Australia. I've got other growers around the world that I support. And it really means that being a very detailed person, hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of your questions. I'm very focused on the plant health and nutrition, and very focused on pest and disease identification and early intervention, if not prevention. So it's one of my passions. These are the 2 products that I've produced in the last couple of years, and we're going to be pulling out some of the information from that as we go through today, as well as the growing guide, which is freely available up on the website to everybody, not just my customers. All right, so we're going to cover quite a lot of topics today. We're going to talk about the difference between Softneck and Hardneck, go right back to basics. Talk about the garlic groups, which you may or may not be familiar with, but this is how we now talk about garlic, because these garlic groups give us all of the characteristics that are very specific to those groups and helps us to understand everything about them. Going to match the garlic groups to your climate, so that growing the right garlic in the right climate is the first step to getting great garlic. And then we're going to work out how you can choose your garlic based on your climate, but also its storage and your cooking styles and your cultural preferences. So it's not just about growing the biggest bulb. For me personally, I find I choose a garlic because of what I'm going to be cooking with. And I like the flavours of that garlic in that authentic recipe. And I like to have garlic that's in my kitchen all year round, and I might cycle through the different garlics. But certainly I never want to run out of garlic. And I think that's a lot of people's goal, is to never run out of their homegrown garlic. So we'll always talk about including a long storing garlic, which is a 12-month natural storer. That's how we get garlic all year round. We'll work out how much you need to grow. I often get asked the questions, how much do I need? And we need to work out what area you need for planting. That's an easy one, so I'll show you that. Talk about storing your garlic prior to planting, because you may have had it delivered or you may even have your own, and it can actually deteriorate rather rapidly. So we need to actually store it in good conditions to make sure we're planting it in its healthiest stage. Understand the planting times. You'll often hear a lot of different myths about when to plant. We're going to really demystify that and make sure that you understand why we are planting at different times. And we're going to start about the bed preparation. So quite a lot to get through. And let's go ahead and get going with that. Now, I know I'm starting with a really pixelated image, but there is this guy, which is Fillory Farm, and this is Paul Engeland, wrote a seminal book back in 1995 called Growing Great Garlic. And whilst it's aged in many of its science facts, it's probably a person who I would always recognise in the garlic industry from out of America. This is one of his diagrams that he had included, and I think they're great ones to recognise him, but just to explain the differences about it. Whenever we're talking about garlic, and particularly when we want to know its growth habits and also its harvesting timings, we want to understand if it's a soft neck or a hard neck garlic. And it has a bit of difference between those as well. So a softneck garlic technically does not produce a scape. This is the hard stalk that comes out of the center of the plant once the plant is mature. It's often called a flower head or a flower neck. A serpent garlic is a hardneck, and a softneck garlic does not produce that. In not producing that, its bulbs are actually quite unusually shaped, not radial sometimes, quite oblong, and they tend to have 3 layers of cloves, an outer layer, a middle layer, and an inner layer, which is really quite tiny. So the major difference with the softnecks is that there is no stalk. Because there's no scape, we actually get this unusual pattern of cloves, and there's variable sized cloves in a softneck. So not all of the cloves are going to be the same size and the same shape. And some people get really annoyed by these tiny garlics or tiny cloves inside the bulb because they're tall and thin and there's lots of them and they're really hard to peel. It's really quite easy to identify an artichoke because of this unusual artichoke shape. It's this layered clove shape, and they often have a flat face on the wedge of their cloves. The hardnecks do produce this scape, and this scape actually means that it produces in the center the scape, and cloves around it become quite wedge-shaped in this single layer of radial patterned. You can get a couple of smaller cloves, and certainly inside you can get a couple, but generally the cloves are larger and generally they're much more consistent in size. So when we see this scape in a bulb, it normally means that that's a hardneck, and you'll normally see this 3-sided wedged shaped clove, and that's also an indicator of a hardneck. Now, there is no other generalizations that we can make about softnecks and hardnecks, about their storage or their climate likes or anything else, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. But it does mean in general, hardnecks are likely to produce a scape. They will have fewer, larger, more wedge-shaped and consistent sized cloves. And the softnecks don't produce a scape and have 3 layers of cloves and can have an annoying inner layer of cloves. Personally, I love the softnecks. If I'm cooking Italian, I'm always going to use an Italian artichoke, and that's a softneck garlic. So I have no bias against softneck garlics. When people talk about garlic, they'll either talk about it being a red or a white garlic historically. And in fact, sometimes even before we've got this new structure, they would have said it's a white softneck or a red hardneck. They never used the word purple. It was always called a white or a red. And if you speak to people who come from Europe and are that older generation, they'll often speak about growing a white softneck garlic because that's the only terms that they had for describing it. In the last 10 years, we've actually now got to this structure that we're currently using. And this is now becoming a universal structure all over the world as we adopt to these different types of garlics. And this structure recognizes all of the different garlics that grow around the world. They are broken into this primary softneck and hardneck category. And that's again because of the bulb shape and clove characteristics. But there's this other groups underneath it, where in softnecks, we talk about rarely bolting garlics. They're ones that rarely ever produce a scape. And there's a semi-bolting garlic. Bolting means producing a scape, and that's a subtropical that grows up in northern New South Wales and Queensland. In the hardnecks, there's also 2 other categories. One that's called a weakly bolting category, and that's an unusual group of garlics. They're garlics that can grow both in warm temperate climates and cool temperate climates. And in the warmer climates, they won't produce a scape. And in the cooler climates, they do produce a scape and a strong scape. So that can be confusing for people because they might often call these softnecks because they're not producing a scape in a warm climate. But technically, they're a weakly bolting hardneck. And it's simply that category of garlics means that they don't produce a scape when they're grown in a very warm climate. And the last group is called strongly bolting. And this is because these have evolved in cooler climates and they will always produce a scape. And with those characteristics in those garlic groups, and of course, elephant garlic's up here, it's not a true garlic. This is Allium sativum is a true garlic. Elephant garlic is Allium ampeloprasum. It's more closely related to a leek than it is to a true garlic. But with this structure, we have now a garlic group. So these are the garlic groups, and it's why I will always talk about the garlic group first, because it's the garlic group that defines the growing climate that it will grow in, its planting and harvesting times and sequence, the storage duration of that garlic, the bulb shape and color, the clove arrangement and shape, the flavors, and the cooking styles. So everything about that commonality is about the garlic group. The cultivar, some people call them varieties, but the cultivar, which is, for example, an Italian late, is the cultivar of the artichoke group, is the unique genetic line that comes from a provincial culture and a geographic area, and that it has unique flavors and culinary styles because of that cultural origin. So that's the two terms that we use whenever we're talking about garlics, in describing whether or not they are a garlic group and what cultivar, and then we know whether or not what their scaping behavior is, and so we know what their bulb shape and their clove shape and arrangement will be. A little bit of background, the standard purple stripe is probably the most closest progenitor to the original garlic that was found and has then spread around the world about 5 to 7 years ago. And as the garlic went across the trade route towards Asia, it evolved into a turban garlic. As it went over towards Korea and Japan, it further evolved into an Asiatic garlic. As it moved down into the warmer climates, it became a subtropical. As it moved west over to Europe in those warmer Mediterranean climates, it lost its scaping behavior and it became softneck garlics, where we have artichokes and silver skins in this European region. And over towards Basque, France, and Spain, it actually evolved into a Creole. And this is the spice route that traded and moved this garlic. And those thousands of years it acclimated to different climates and different regions and different soils. And through different cultural practices, it evolved from this unique standard purple stripe progenitor into something else. And as it moved up into the much more colder climates, it evolved into these strongly bolting garlics. So here we have all of the weakly bolting, the soft neck garlics, and then the strongly bolting hard neck garlics. So bolting scaping is a direct relationship to the chill factor, the depth of winter cold, the number of months of that extreme cold that a garlic evolved in and is exposed to. It's a stress behavior to a cold climate environment. So that's how we've ended up with this evolutionary trend. And of course, with those different cultures then managing those garlics then evolved through natural selection, through human intervention, to reflect the flavors of that culture. And they're really unique because we grow them on vegetatively, which means that they're not produced through true flowers. We just keep replanting the bulb. Those garlic will retain that genetic flavor of that culture that they evolved from. So it's quite a unique relationship where we have now these beautiful garlics that were very much related to the geographic area that they came from and the cultures where they were shaped by for thousands of years. So just to show another way, and these are things coming from this laminated guide that I've produced, really a climate range is where we can start splitting those garlics up into that range. So when anybody ever asks me, what garlic should I be growing? Of course, I ask, where are you? Where are you based? I look up your climate chart. And I would then, according to the characteristics that we know about the garlic, match the different types of garlics to your climate range. The things that differentiate these major climates is really about the depth of cold and duration of winter. So how long and what temperatures are you reaching in winter? And that's overnight and also daytime. And then the second question is, how fast and how hot is your spring? Because they're the two characteristics that really determine, which garlics are going to work well. And I'm going to do the extremes. So for example, the porcelains and the rocamboles came from frozen scape environments. These are the guys up in Siberia, in Canada, Northern America, where they have snow on the ground for 4 to 5 months of the year. These guys need that depth of cold to actually be healthy. You can't grow these guys up into a warm temperate climate where you get warm 22-degree winter days. They need that cold. And the same is true of these subtropical garlics. They evolved in a subtropical climate. They are day length neutral, which means they don't have that 12-hour bulbing requirement. But at the same time, they're very intolerant of any type of extreme or prolonged winter cold. They need those growing temperatures during the winter. So these guys want to have that warm climate. These guys want to have that very cold climate. And then in between, we've got this warm and cool temperate climate environment. These guys don't mind the cold over winter as long as there's some reasonable sunlight and warmth during the day. These guys prefer to have a longer and colder winter, and they can handle the longer and cooler and sometimes overcast and wet springs. So there's our difference between those garlics of where they evolved in, what geographic area, what climatic range, and certainly the depth of cold in the winter and how fast and hot the spring is. Let's take that a little bit further. I'm just going to take out, this is the chart again that's in that guide, and it's got all of those garlic groups. It's now starting to allocate whether they're an extra early and harvest period mid or late. More importantly, down here, we've got the storage durations of these garlics, because all garlics store for different times naturally. So our most commonly grown garlic in Australia and loved by Tasmanians is a turban garlic. But that turban garlic is the shortest storing garlic we have. It only stores for 4 to 5 months. Most of the garlics are going to be 5 to 7 or 6 to 8. Some of them are 7 to 9 months. And actually 2 of them, of the true garlics, store for 12 months. And that's a really important factor to look at the storage so that you're managing so you have all year round garlic. Now, not all of these garlics are brilliant with all of the different cooking styles. There we have roasting, slow fooding, sauteing, stir fry, fresh. The main difference between the sauteing versus the roasting groups is the sweetness, the sugar content of a garlic. So, of course, the Italian artichokes are perfect because they're piquant and they're strong and they're sharp, a little bit of creamy notes, very little sugars, and they're great for sauteing because of that oily content. But if you compared them to a gooey, ooey Creole or an amazing marbled standard purple stripe with the higher sugar contents, these are the guys that create that wonderful, oozy, caramelized, gooey, roasted garlic, amazing product. And it's the sugars that changes it. So there are different culinary uses, there's different storage, and there's different flavor intensities. So, a good Spanish Creole is going to knock your socks off, whereas a turban is quite mild or medium by comparison. So flavor strength, cooking styles, storage styles, harvesting periods, a huge range of what options you have available to us. And if we go back and look at the cultural behaviors of those European and Asian cultures that have been growing and using garlic for thousands of years, you will find that they will typically grow 3 to 4 different garlic. And they do that because of the range of culinary styles and storage durations. So I want to give you an example of that, because when we understand how these cultures used and grew garlic, then we can really understand how we can apply that to our growing practices as well. In southern Italy, in the very, very southern Mediterranean regions, where it's very hot, very, very hot, very mild winters, they would grow a subtropical garlic, which is only 7 to 9 months in storage. They'd grow a turban, maybe not, and they'd grow an artichoke. That's it. They couldn't grow anything more because it's too hot too early. And garlic has what's called a kill temperature of greater than 35 degrees. It just does not handle temperatures greater than 35. As we move a little bit north where it's cooler, so central and northern Italy, which is warm and cool temperates, they wouldn't grow subtropicals because it's too cool for them. They would grow an artichoke that gives them 7 to 9 months. And in the northern Italy, they would grow silver skins, which store for 12 months. In the central Italy, they would grow creoles that store for 12 months. So they would typically grow 2 or 3 garlics to be able to give them their perfect cooking culinary experience, and then the longevity that they're looking for so that they've got fresh garlic to go into the new season. In northern France, it's the same. They would, by preference, use creoles, artichokes and creoles, and they also do silver skins in northern France as well. So that's the typical European style of experience. And when we equate that back over to Australia, just to sort of show us, we have a huge climatic range in Australia. So for Queensland and Western Australia and those Mediterranean regions, it's the same thing. We would use a subtropical and an elephant garlic to give us that 12 months, because there is no other garlic that can grow in that subtropical climate that will give us that long storage. So it has to be elephant garlic to give us a 12-month storage. When we go into northern New South Wales, that's a little bit cooler during the winter, we can start to grow some more turbans or artichokes. And we can grow some creoles in the non-humid regions because they're 12-month storage. So elephant garlic or creoles, here's your 12-month storage. And here's our choices that we have for our other culinary styles. When we go southern into central New South Wales, northern Victoria, northern South Australia, we can start to include a couple more of the slightly cooler loving garlics. And as the further south that we go, the more of the cooler climate garlics we can grow. We're still looking at which ones are going to give us that 12-month storage, but we've got more cooking styles, more cultural options that we can actually grow from. And elevated regions really do mimic across Australia those really cool temperate climate conditions. So there's lovely places in South Australia, or even really down south, the very southernmost area of Western Australia can grow quite a lot of the cool climate garlics. And that's where we can start to see some of the rocamboles and porcelains coming back in. I have a personal love of rocamboles because they're nutty and creamy and buttery and mouth coating. I would say they're one of my favourite garlic butter types of garlics. Asiatics are perfect for that as well. They have the same flavour characteristics. But, you know, being able to grow some of those really sweet buttery garlics is amazing. But again, having variety of cooking. Italian, I would go for artichokes. If I'm cooking Indian, I would be using silver skins. If I was cooking Spanish, I would be using creoles. So again, that beautiful authenticity that we have means that this is how we can choose those 2, 3, or 4 different garlics. Always something around your cooking preferences, particularly if they're cultural, and certainly always incorporating those long storing garlics so that you've got your own garlic all year round. Now, I've done this as a visual because I know that Australians, more than any other country in the world, loves the colour purple in their garlic. And so I've put all of the different garlics up here in a picture so that you can see the purples, but I'm going to plead with you that the colour on the bulb skin has nothing to do with the flavour or the culinary qualities of a garlic. So whilst you might love the colour purple for garlic, please, I'm going to beg you to think about the culinary and the flavour qualities of a garlic rather than just the colour of the bulbs. They are all beautiful in their own way, and even the clove colours have amazing clove colours behind white bulb skins. Personally, I would always choose for the flavour and the storage and the culinary qualities rather than the bulb skin quality. I do know that for people who are slightly more mature and have less dexterous fingers, that larger cloves are better for you and easy peeling cloves, and that's great. But again, the colour purple has nothing to do with the ease of peeling or the bulb size. So it's a great visual just to remind you how beautiful and diverse they are in how they look. So how much do you need to grow? It's often a question I get asked, and it's a fairly simple range that I work with. If you're a moderate user, which means you're probably going to use 1 bulb every 2 weeks, then you really only need to be harvesting about 30 bulbs per annum. If we work back from that, and if you want to seed save, which means you're going to put some bulbs aside to regrow the next year, if you're using 30 bulbs, you're probably going to want to grow 35 plants. So you've got your 5 bulbs for your next season. That means you're planting 35 cloves. And on average, a plantable bulb has about 8 plantable cloves per bulb. So it's easy to come back to 8 fours of 32. That's almost roughly there to 35. You could go up to 5 bulbs if you want, but you can see how easy it is to get from a moderate user, 35 plants, 35 cloves. It means 4 bulbs, and that gives you roughly around 5 bulbs to keep. Now, the planting spacing, and I am recommending everybody does have this 20 by 20 spacing because it is the best spacing for optimizing sunlight on the plants, ventilation between the plants, which is plant health, minimizing root competition, and it's the best spacing for minimizing pest and disease issues and risks. So you'll get healthier, bigger, disease and pest-free bulbs from that. So that's 25 cloves a square metre at that spacing. And that means that for 35 plants, you'll need 1.4 square metres of beds. Fairly simple way to be able to get down to an average user. You can use that method of calculation for anything you need to do. So an average garlic user might use 50 bulbs per annum, about 1 bulb per week, 56 cloves, 7 bulbs, 2.5 square metres of beds. And what we call a gift giver or a preserver, so a family that loves to be able to share their garlic, does a lot of their own preserving with passatas, might use between 100 to 150 bulbs per annum. That's usually about 2 bulbs a week. And again, that equates up to 110 plants, 110 cloves. At 8 cloves per bulb, 14 bulbs. And keeping your own bulb stock means that you've got to increase from 100 to 110, and it's about 4.5 square metres of garlic. So that, again, summary between what's reasonable or not, between a moderate user and a large user, gives you a good idea about how many bulbs that you're going to need to keep or buy and how much bed space you're going to need to be able to use. So planting is always going to be one of these questions that you hear a lot of myths about. Plant on the shortest day, harvest on the longest. And I can tell you that that's related to a very European practice of growing artichokes in Central Europe. It does not belong to any of the other garlic groups whatsoever. So what we have is that when we're talking about growing garlic and when to plant garlic specifically, it's actually by the garlic group, and it's going to vary just slightly. So you can see subtropicals, February to March. And the reason why, again, is because of that kill temperature. In those subtropical climates, no garlic can survive consistent temperatures above 35 degrees. So they need to plant earlier for that plant to grow through winter and be able to harvest in time before those temperatures reach 35 degrees. The rest of the garlics down here is April to May. There are a couple that are May to June, and these are really the garlics very specifically that only have growth in spring. It's no use growing these garlics or planting these garlics any earlier because they're going to sit in the ground and rot in the ground. These guys only have spring growth. These guys are capable of growing through winter if it's warm enough, or they'll become dormant if they're not. So the planting is related to the garlic group. And when we're going to plant, because there's 2 months in here, is very specific that if you're in a warmer climate, you plant in that first month. You'll plant in April. If you're in a cooler climate, you're going to plant in the second month, which is May. Now I'm going to talk about why that's important, but that's the next page. When you've got your garlic, a lot of people will actually keep the garlic out in the shed or in the garage. But if you want to keep it in really premium condition before you plant it, I really recommend that you keep it in a stable, warm, dry environment. The dry is really important. So we don't want it to be in any closed containers, plastic or glass. We don't want to pop it in the refrigerator. We don't want to have it in direct sunlight, which is temperature changes. We don't want to put it in any area with high moisture because that can include and really degrade the bulb because of penicilliums that will start to infect it because of the high moisture environments. And we don't want it anywhere with large temperature fluctuations. So I know that sounds almost complex, but if you just keep it in, your cardboard box with paper or the wood wool that I've supplied with you in those breathable bags, in maybe the laundry, which tends to be cooler, rather than the rest of the house, but not outside where it's really exposed to the rains that are starting up in April and May, because that high humidity can cause a lot of molds and mildews to start developing on that bulb before it's planted. And then it's degraded before it's actually going to go into the ground. Now, I wanted to show you a photograph of why we don't plant everything at the same time. So this was an example of all of the garlic groups taken at the 1st of April. And it's the shoot inside that really indicates to us when that garlic knows that it's time to grow. Now that shoot should be what we call 2/3 to 3/4 of the way up the clove, which means it's perfect timing for growing. So as at the 1st of April, this is down in Tasmania, my cloves, and only the subtropical and the turban, is ready to plant. All of the other garlics, which are all of the later harvesting, longer storing garlics, all of them, their shoot is completely undeveloped. You can see that shoot down here. It's the cavity is opened up, but the shoot is undeveloped completely because it's too early to plant those, even looking at April. So all of these garlics are continuously monitoring the climate. They're actually monitoring the moisture and the temperatures. They will trigger their shooting when they have accumulated enough chill hours to trigger that. We don't want to plant the garlics too early because they will sit in the ground and they can rot. So these timings that I'm giving you are literally trying to help you to get the best out of your garlic so that they germinate well. So warm climates when the winter growth is possible, and that's why we plant earlier, because you're going to have lovely growing temperatures in winter, but you could be having very hot late springs that kill temperatures. So we do plant within that first month of the timing because that allows us then to get good plant growth on. They're going to grow through the winter time and they're going to get that lovely warm, dry early spring and mature before those extreme temperatures start to kill them off. In the cool and the cold climates where we have dormancy, now dormancy is any temperatures during the day that's less than 12 degrees. And it means the garlic won't grow during that sub 12 degrees days. We won't get any growth. And often those climates are going to have really long and cool, wet springs. Nothing frustrates and stresses a garlic worse than expecting to have warm and dry conditions and having cold and wet conditions. So we typically plant later in that second month. So it means that by the time we're heading into winter, we've only got what we call a juvenile stage plant, which is actually a small 4-leaf plant. It means that during that winter, that plant is not stressed because there's low lights, it's cold temperatures, there's no nutrient coming out of the soil because it's so cold. It's going to be in dormancy, and that small juvenile plant is fine. And we want it to remain juvenile even during those horrid early wet spring conditions. And then it'll start to grow into those middle of spring and late spring conditions and summery and summer when it's warmer and drier. So for example, my late harvesting standard purple stripes won't harvest until the end of January or the first week in February. So they're really growing technically from October through to January. They really do not grow through winter and they don't grow at all during early spring. So that's the reason why we have these 2 months and the timing of the planting, because of these garlic groups' natural growth patterns are related to their original climate that they came from, and it's geared so they grow into the really preferred climatic conditions that they have. All right, bed preparation, it's a single slide, but I would say choose your beds with full sun exposure. So these garlics need to have warm, dry leaves. Leaf disease occurs when leaves don't get sunlight to dry them off, when they have too much moisture on them for too long, and they need to get that photosynthesis to really drive that early spring growth and all that winter growth if you're in a growing region and climate which allows for winter growth. Always rotate your beds. And I know that everyone says that you don't need to, but we want to have only used once in every 3 years, and that's because of the disease accumulation. You need free draining soils, 40 to 50 centimeters depth and the deeper you have it, the better your garlic will love it. Big roots equals big plants equals big bulbs. Sandy or sandy loam is preferred. High clay content soils are problematic. We've seen that in the last couple of years, specifically related to these new bacterial diseases that have been coming through. So clay is good for some crops, but certainly not garlic, and certainly not in wet seasons. And look, we're looking to enrich either with formulas. We can use aged manures, blood bone, gypsum, potassium sulfate, C-mungus, or there's a couple of Nutrog products that I've been trialing and recommending to home growers, which I just absolutely love. The idea with amending your beds is that this crop is going to be in these beds for 7 to 8 months. It's the longest growing annual crop that there is. And it's going to have really specific needs of some good nutrient in autumn. If you're in what we call a winter growing climate, it's going to continue to grow through winter. You're going to need to feed it again in spring to keep it going. For winter dormancy, we want it to grow in autumn, but not be stimulated during winter in the dormant period. And we want to have a slow release of nutrient in that cool, slow spring. So these types of feeding systems are about establishing your bed, and you're going to have to feed it during the growing plant season as well. I often get asked about pots. And pots are something that there's not been a lot of success with. If you are going to use pots, they do have to be pots that aren't going to absorb the heat. So black plastic pots absorb a lot of heat, create a warm, dry soil, and that causes a lot of plant stress for the garlic. So you can use pots, but I would genuinely recommend that you use concrete, terracotta, or ceramic, really wide pots, and it's trying to keep that soil mass to keep it cool. They don't mind the warm sunlight and the direct sunlight on a hot day, as long as their roots aren't overheated in hot, dry soil. So wide pots, deep pots, and something that's not going to absorb the heat and heat up the soil is really great. And then please check your pH. It's really important that that pH is around the 6.5 to 7. Most people say that there's a broader range that garlic can tolerate. There really isn't. And I'm going to show you a chart which is often used to demonstrate that here's a soil pH. This is what garlic evolved and prefers, which is 6.5 to 7. And these are what we call the macro and the micro and trace elements that the plants rely upon predominantly. And you can see between 6.5 to 7, it's the really Goldilocks zone for garlic. There's really sufficient nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfurs. Calcium is really in there, magnesium, the trace elements are in there. If we moved that zone so your pH was 7 to 7.5, we start to lose phosphorus, we start to lose some calcium, and we start to lose some trace elements. And if it's too acidic, we actually lose quite a bit more. So that 6.5 to 7 pH is the really optimal zone for garlic to make sure it can get access to those nutrients that it's going to need in the soils. Oh, that was a really quick session on Zoom 1. I just wanted to remind us that Zoom 2 is about the next stage, which is your pre-planting treatments, pest and disease control, germination. This is always an interesting topic for a lot of people, and I do quite a lot of things myself with reasons. We talk about the planting steps, how to plant, spacing and depth, your planting treatments to inoculate and aid germination, and mulching. And then the third Zoom goes into that growing, winter growing, fertilizing, or watering, harvesting and curing. So that's the presentation side of tonight's Zoom. And it leaves us open then to be able to have some questions from the audience. I'm going to start with the questions that are in the chat, and I'm going to just take this off for now in case we have, just stop sharing in case we want to go back and refer to it. It allows us to come back if we need to and pull that out. So with that, sorry, let me grab the chat screen. All right. Shared screen, excellent. Which was first, Softnecks or Hardnecks? Oh, first evolution. So who was this? John S. Who was first? It was definitely the Hardneck. So the original progenitor closest to what came out of what we call the Tien Shan and Kazakhstan region was actually a strongly bolting hardneck garlic. And so it produced escape in that original cold climate. And then as it went over towards Asia, particularly in the temperate climate, it started to lose that scaping into a weakly bolting. And as it moved over into Western Europe, over into the Mediterranean climates, it created the Softnecks, which were completely non-bolting garlics. So John S., you can unmute and tell me, did I answer your question to you? Thank you, John. Good on you. And generally speaking, is there an average failure rate for sprouting and germination? I would tell you that, in my opinion, and this is about seed quality management, and that's a very specialty topic, by the way, is how do you optimize the absolute health of your seed stock, which is your planting stock? The answer is you should get a complete 100% germination rate. And I would tell you, in every one of my bulbs that I plant out of my seed stock, I get 100% germination. If you don't get 100% germination, then there is an issue either with your planting beds, your seed stock, or your water management. And it could be a pest or disease issue in the cloves or in the beds itself. But with really healthy bulbs in really healthy soils, you should have 100% germination all the time. Now, I can't guarantee, which is, I would say I have blackbirds down here in Tasmania, and I also have wallabies, which are little tiny ones, and they will get up, the blackbirds will dig in the bed and they'll dig out and steal my cloves. So obviously, if there's a clove stolen, I don't count that as a failed germination. It's just a blackbird that's taken it away. But no blackbirds, 100% germination should be the goal with that. Catherine, did that answer your question correctly? Can't see Catherine in the group. Hope so. If not, call out and tell me if I didn't answer that. Okay, let's go through. Lovely comments. Thank you very much. Letitia, I have Dungansky. This is from Danny. I have Dungansky Standard Purple Stripe that I bought from you in 2020, but I planted them in the ground with my Italian mates on the weekend. Oops. I'm in Melbourne. I'm only now realizing that it's an error and should have waited until May. Correct. I assume I just wait and leave them there. Danny, I would say if you are in raised beds with really free draining beds, you might get away with it, which is great. I would also say that I would encourage you to stimulate germination by applying Sea-Sol once a week for the next 4 weeks, because Sea-Sol has a wonderful natural rooting hormone as part of that, and it can stimulate germination, but I would not try and remove them, dig them up, or do anything. I would just simply try and apply that Sea-Sol. And if your soils are lovely and free draining, and if the bulbs were healthy, which they should be because they're from me, then it should be absolutely fine. So, but normally I would certainly wait. I can tell you I plant my Dungansky Standard Purple Stripes in June. And I'm planting in June because they're only going to produce 3 leaves. And what we know is that actually these garlics, their entire job during winter, by the way, even in a dormant environment, is to just produce this root mass. So we never judge the garlic by the size and number of the leaves in terms of its progress. We're really knowing that that garlic's winter job is to produce at least 85% of its root mass to drive that spring growth in the springtime period. So Danny, I would just say use Sea-Sol, keep applying, dig down and just check that the roots are up. Don't dislodge the clove, and you should be fine if you've got free draining soils. So I wish you the best of luck with that one. And did you say 1/2 to 2/3 for the shoots to be up inside the clove? Yes. So if you're doing what I do, which is I always check my cloves just to see progress, because the garlic knows more than me when it wants to be planted. I never want to see cloves and shoots coming out of the top of the cloves before I plant. I never want to see roots coming out of that clove before I plant. That's too late to do that. I want to get it before the shoot and the roots come out, and I would always be looking at the 2/3 mark. 2/3 to 3/4 of the way up the clove is the perfect planting time. And that means technically that that plant will germinate and produce roots and shoots very rapidly. And it also means it's in its best ability to have an active immune system functioning. So the roots will give it nutrients and water, the shoots will give it photosynthesis. It means that it's a functioning plant very rapidly, which is the main goal of timing the planting to get that very healthy germination occurring. I can tell you, for example, my rock'em bowls, no matter when I plant them, they're going to sit in the ground for 6 weeks and they're waiting for an accumulated chill before they're going to germinate. And it's probably one of the most common questions I get is, there's something wrong with my rock'em bowls? They haven't germinated. And the reason is because they're a truly cold climate garlic and they need to have this accumulated exposure of chill before they're actually going to shoot and root, both of them. It's really interesting. Can we grow them under plastic cover? That's a Katarina. And the answer is, are you talking about a plastic mulch on the beds? And if you are, the answer is absolutely yes. I would use either, and I know in Asia they use clear. In America, in the cold climates, we use a laminated plastic, which is black on the bottom for sunlight suppression and white on the top for sunlight reflection. And that's to make sure that the soils are never overheated by any type of plastic mulch. And the black ones are quite dangerous in terms of the heat penetration into the soil. So yes, you can grow them underneath a plastic mulch, but obviously they need to have sun access to that. Casey, you're asking if water application will be covered in a later Zoom meeting. The answer is yes, that's number 2. No, it's number 3. Yes, number 3. On average, how long does it take for a cultivar to adapt to a new climate condition? Oh, great question, John. The answer is it depends on the direction of where the source seed comes from. If your source seed comes from a cooler climate and it's going to a warmer climate, the acclimation is really quite rapid because it's actually almost as if a Tasmanian's going to the Gold Coast for holidays. You know, they're actually really happy to go from a cooler climate to a warmer climate. So you won't see this dramatic, what we call miniaturization or shrinkage of the plant and the bulb. It'll actually get larger in the first couple of seasons, and then it will start to go a little bit smaller as it returns to its natural size. So you won't lose mass, you won't lose yield when it comes from a colder climate to a warmer climate. If you go from a warmer climate to a colder climate, so from somewhere in northern New South Wales to somewhere in southern New South Wales, you will have an acclimation shock. And depending on the garlic group, that reacclimation can take anywhere from a minimum of 3 years up to 6 or 7 years. So there's a dramatic impact of coming and bringing a garlic from a warmer climate to a cooler climate because it has to go through this shock acclimation as it then has to miniaturize in size and then it has to recover in its size. And that recovery is much slower in doing that. So it is always better to buy or source seed. Doesn't have to be from me, but always try and source your seed from somewhere who's cooler. And that way you'll always get a better reaction. I will tell you there's another acclimation factor. And I know this is getting a little bit technical, but it's called the altitude acclimation. So, you know, if you have anywhere that's at sea level and it's going above 300 meters, it's going to go through an acclimation shock of altitude. Many of the garlics will adapt really quickly, those strongly bolting ones, which came from a really cold climate environment. And those original ones were grown in altitude and they don't experience this altitude shock a lot. However, the Mediterranean ones, the warm temperate climate ones that love the warm climates, they do go through shock. So to take an artichoke from sea level up to 600 meters will miniaturize for about 6 years before it's going to start to grow larger again. So, you know, the garlic has these foibles like this. You know, it likes its stable environment and it doesn't like to be moved around, but it can tolerate going from cooler to warmer. It can't tolerate going from sea level to altitude too much, and it can't tolerate going from warmer to cooler. So it does have this sensitivity to it. And a lot of people have often bought garlic from, I'm going to say it, I love diggers, but they've bought garlic from diggers or they've bought it from Green Harvest, but you don't know where they've bought that garlic from and if that garlic's come from a warmer or cooler climate to where you are. So it's really good to ask the question of where that source garlic was grown to judge whether or not it's coming from a warmer climate or a cooler climate so that you get a really great crop when you're growing that out? That's a really good question, John. Like that one. Okay, good, Danny. When do you stop watering silver skins? Can I answer that in the session 3, which is when we talk about harvesting? Let me leave that one there. Check one kind of bleach solution. We're talking about that in Zoom 2 if you're going to be joining us. And the reason I'm doing that is because pre-planting treatments are vitally important for managing seed health and plant health. It is the only time that we get an opportunity to treat truly problematic issues which you can't see. Some of the times it's dry bulb mites, which are tiny microscopic things you can't see by eyes. The only time we can treat them effectively is before the planting, before they've got shoots and roots, not as effective in the field. So this pre-planting treatments, which a lot of people poo-poo, are actually incredibly important. Bleach is one of the first times I've ever recommended bleach this season, but it's because there has been marked bacterial diseases that have no field treatment or cure. And the only time that we can do anything about any of these, potentially a couple of these diseases, is pre-planting. Hopefully I'll never have to recommend bleach again in the future, but I am recommending it this season because it is the most effective and the harshest pre-treatment that won't impact the health of your clove. And by rinsing it off, it won't contaminate your clove when you're going to be putting in the ground. But please, let's go through that in detail in the second session. Unless you've got a specific reason that you can't attend the second one, then poke up now and say, I can't make it, just answer my question.
Very comfortable.
Okay.
I'm just planting this weekend. Yeah, because I'm in Queensland, so I need
Hey, so is this Tracy who's...
Yeah.
Okay, so Tracy, just wanted to check what kind of bleach solution. Okay, I'm going to answer that one, so thank you. I use White King, unscented.
Okay, cool.
It's the cheapest, most easily available, and I get home delivery from Woolworths, which I absolutely love because I'm in rural Tasmania and I get delivery to the farm, saves me a 3-hour return trip to the supermarket. And it is the cheapest source of hospital grade bleach, which is 42 grams per litre of sodium hypochlorite. It's the same product that all of the scientific pathology laboratories around Australia and the world use to sterilize their products. They do pathology tests. I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, yeah.
So White King unscented is your cheapest hospital grade bleach. Excellent. Okay, advanced question for session 2. What are the differences between fungal, bacterial and virus diseases? Great question, John. I suggest you buy my volume 1 pest and disease guide, which is a great guide, but I will talk to that. Actually, it's a great question, and I think it might be a bit too advanced for a general group, but ask me again for session 2 on that one there. All right, that's the end of the chat recorded questions, and we're past the 45 minutes, which I'm fine with. I am going to press stop recording just for people so they don't get too bored with this, and I'm going to come back to you and see if there's any more questions that you would like to ask live whilst we're doing this. So bear with me while I just stop the recording. And thank you everybody who has attended. If you do want to check out now, absolutely go ahead and end the session. And I've loved that you've been here. If you want to hold on to the end and see if there's any more questions that might give you some information, go ahead and do that. And if you've enjoyed this session and you think that you might get some benefit out of the next couple of free sessions, then go ahead and register into those as well. Let me just stop the recording.